Welcome to another video by AskMath.com. Alright, let's read the directions. Solve the system. Given negative x plus 3y equals negative 1 and negative 5y plus x equals negative 3. So let's just remind ourselves what the directions are asking us to do. A system is just a way to say that you have two or more equations, and in this case we have two. And we've got to remember that an equation that has two variables in it, like an x and a y, if you are to graph it, if that equation has just addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division in it, like this one does, and no exponents or anything like that, then it makes a straight line on a graph. And we have two equations, so it's going to make two straight lines on a graph. And many times, two straight lines will cross each other at one single point, and that point has coordinates in the form x comma y, and that is the solution to the system. So solve the system means find the x and y values at the point where two lines cross where the lines were generated by these equations. Now remember that two lines don't have to cross at a single point. It could be parallel lines, in which case there is no solution, or you could have one line directly on top of another line, in which case they have infinite solutions. They cross everywhere. But this is the type that we're being asked to solve, so we're going to assume that there's just one point at which they cross. Now graphing isn't actually the ideal way to solve a system of equations because we don't have graph paper. If a numbers are very large, for example, you would need a very large sheet of graph paper. You can also make mistakes visually. Maybe you don't have a very sharp pencil. You don't have a ruler. Also, computers, they can't really use graphs. They might show you a graph, but they don't use graphs the way that you might by visually looking at something. Computers need equations to crunch numbers, to give you things like your location when you're looking at your phone and you're asking for directions somewhere. It's showing you your path and maybe the path of someone else and what point you're going to meet. You need to be able to solve a different way. So not graphing. There's two other methods. One is called substitution and one's called combination. Now substitution works very well when on one side of an equal sign you have just a single variable, like just an x or just a y. Neither equation has just an x or just a y on one side of the equal sign. So substitution is probably not the easiest method to use. We're going to use combination. And combination just means adding together any terms that are like terms, which means anything with an x in it can be added with something else with an x in it. Anything with a y can be added with something else with a y. Anything with just a number can be added to something else with just a number. Now, the best way or easiest way to do this is to make sure that your x's and y's are lined up between your two equations. So right now, the x and the 5y are lined up, and the 3y and the x are lined up. We want that to be switched. So I'm just going to rewrite my equations, negative x plus 3y equals negative 1. And now the second one I'm going to rewrite. Remember that you can use commutative property for expressions and just move those expressions around. So this expression is a positive x. The sign goes with whatever term is to the right. And this expression is a negative 5y. So I'm just going to move this positive x over here, and I'm just going to move this negative 5y over here. And I can do that because of the commutative property. It just means that you can add things in any order. Just like if I did 2 plus 3 makes 5, 3 plus 2 also makes 5. It doesn't matter if you just switch those around. Okay, so equals negative 3. Okay, now they're nice and lined up. And hey, look, what we have here is we have a negative x and a positive x. Those are exact opposites of each other. And that's fantastic for combination, because the goal is to, when you add the two equations together, is to get a 0 when you add the x's or the y's together. The reason is that you can't solve an equation. We can't solve for x or for y if we have both variables in an equation. But if we combine these two equations, and what I'm doing here is just like when you used to write problems like this, maybe in elementary school, you used to write them like that with an equal sign. That's what I'm doing here. So I'm just going to add negative x, positive x, that makes 0. Positive 3 and a negative 5, that makes a negative 2. Y. And a negative 1 and a negative 3 makes negative 4. So my x's since they're 0, they're gone. And now I can solve this equation. So to solve, I use PEMDAS, the order of operations, backwards. And I ask the question, what's happening to the variable? What's happening to y? Is it being subtracted? Nope. Remember, this is being multiplied. So it's not being subtracted, it's not being added, it's not being divided, it's being multiplied by -2. So I'm going to use the inverse of multiply, which is divide. I'm going to divide both sides of the equation by -2, so that negative divided by negative makes positive, and 2 divided by 2 makes 1, and 1y is just written y. Negative divided by negative makes positive, and 4 divided by 2 makes 2. Now I have solved this equation, and I've gotten 2, but that's really just half of my answer. I have to finish the problem by now taking that solution and substituting it into either equation, your choice, to find out what x is. So I'm going to pick the first one. It looks, I don't know, maybe a little simpler, a little bit smaller numbers. And I'm going to write -x plus 3 times, but then I'm going to have parentheses where the y was, because that's what I'm going to substitute this 2 in for, equals -1. I'm going to take that 2, put it where the y was, because y equals 2, that's what goes where the y used to be. And now I have -x plus 6, I'll just simplify that, equals -1. Now again, use PEMDAS backwards to solve. What's happening to x? Well, remember that x is being multiplied by a -1. When you just see a negative, it's a -1, and that means multiplication. So again, to solve, we're going to use PEMDAS backwards. So is it being subtracted by anything? Nope. Is it being added? Yes, by 6. I'm going to use the inverse of addition, which is subtraction, and subtract 6 from both sides. And that makes 0, and I'm left with -1x equals, and a -1 and a -6 combined to make -7. Okay, done. Is x being divided? No. Is it being multiplied? Yes, by -1. So use the inverse of multiply, which is divide both sides by -1. So that -1 divided by -1 makes positive, 2 negatives divided make positive, and 1 divided by 1 makes 1. 1x is just x. 2 negatives divided make positive, and 7 divided by 1 makes 7. X equals 7. 7,2 is the solution to the system. Let's check our work just to make sure that we haven't made a mistake. To check your work, you can take your answers and just substitute them into either equation, or both if you want to be extra sure. And so let's just use the second equation since we haven't really done much with that one yet. And we'll just put parentheses where the variables are. And the first one was a y, so we're going to plug in the 2, which is what y equals. And the second one is an x, so we're going to plug in the 7 where the x was. And we're just going to evaluate. And remember, to evaluate, use PEMDAS forwards. And that just means that anything in the parentheses we do first. Well, there's nothing happening in the parentheses, so we skip that. There's no exponents. Multiplication, -5 times +2, negative times a positive makes a negative, and 5 times 2 makes 10. And 7. Okay, there's no division. There is addition, and so we're just going to combine -10 and +7, and that makes -3. And when you get a result that is true, that means that your answer was correct. All right, thank you for watching another video from AskMath.com, where there are tons more free math tutorials that you can watch to help you learn algebra as well as other math subjects. Thanks for watching.